Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum. Please excuse the voice, I'm getting over some congestion here, but it is not going to stop me from showing you this World War I Winchester Model 1897 trench gun. This is the iconic version of the American combat shotgun, produced and used in World War I. Now, the US Army had experience with combat shotgun use going into World War I. The US Army had used shotguns in the Philippines, fighting the insurrection against the Moros. They had taken combat shotguns, Winchester 1897s, in fact, along with the Mexican Punitive Expedition in 1916. The American, like the Old West, as we think of it today, the Western expansion in the US had featured fairly substantial use of shotguns as a combat weapon loaded with buckshot. And there was an appreciation in the US for the, how effective of a close combat weapon a shotgun really could be. Much more of an appreciation than there was in the various European militaries. The British and the French both did consider use of shotguns during World War I and both rejected it on the idea that they just wouldn't really have been effective. It seems most likely they were thinking primarily about birdshot, which wouldn't have been effective, but that was really the predominant role that shotguns took in Europe at the time. They didn't have the use of shotguns as buckshot-loaded combat weapons that we did here in the US. So anyway, when the US gets formally into World War I, they're looking at the weapons that are going to be needed, and in this case, it is actually with the direct intervention of General Pershing, Blackjack Pershing. Of course, the Americans would have a general named Blackjack who wants to take combat shotguns into the trenches, right? Well, he does. The idea of jumping into a trench with a bolt-action Springfield rifle is not really morale boosting. Like you've only got five rounds. They're relatively slow to fire. And it's a long gun at close range, not great. We didn't have submachine guns. Of course, the whole concept of the submachine gun is just coming into existence by the very end of World War I. But you take one of those Winchester 1897 pump shotguns loaded with buckshot, and you have a fantastic, powerful, close combat weapon. It's gonna suck on long-range open engagements, but if you have to jump into a trench surrounded by German soldiers, this could be a fantastic weapon. Now, as I said, we had Winchester 1897s in military inventory, but they weren't deemed suitable for the trenches because they were basically just commercial, riot-length, 20-inch barreled shotguns. For use in World War I, they decided that these guns needed to have bayonets, because if you run out of ammo, which you certainly could in a situation like that, you need to have some secondary way to use the weapon. We had bayonets on all the rifles, we needed a bayonet on the shotgun. And so the US Army approached Winchester and essentially said, look, we want a Winchester 97 riot gun, but we want you to put a bayonet on it. And so Winchester looks at the problem and they develop this bayonet mount. So let's take a closer look at that. In order to make logistical sense, the US wanted to use existing combat bayonets on these shotguns. Now, there were two different bayonets that were in US service at the time. One is the bayonet for the 1903 Springfield, and one is the bayonet for the model 1917 Enfield. Now, contrary to common belief, the US actually had a lot more M1917 Enfield rifles in World War I than we did Springfields by a ratio of something like 2 or 3 to 1. And Winchester, who made the 1897, was one of the contractors making M1917 rifles and bayonets. So it was decided to simply use 1917 pattern bayonets for the trench shotguns. They were already being made at Winchester. That meant Winchester could supply the complete kit ready to go, and it made logistical sense. Now, if we take a look at this bayonet, it has to have a ring that big so it will fit on a rifle. The barrel of a shotgun is rather larger. That's not going to fit over a shotgun barrel, so something has to be done. And the something was essentially to mount a fake solid muzzle ring down below the muzzle of the shotgun. So this ring will fit onto a 1917 bayonet. And then the same mounting block has a bayonet lug on it that is set up in the proper geometry to fit onto the back end of said bayonet, and presto, there is your bayonet mount. Now, it's a little clunky looking to have it mounted this low, dropped under the barrel. And there's an apocryphal story that When this was presented to the Army, they complained that this looked funky and looked like it was fragile and might break. And a quick-thinking Winchester employee explained that, oh, well, we had to put the blade down low so that the pellets from the shotgun wouldn't hit it, which is nonsense. These, you had to have essentially no spread of the pellets by the time you get to the end of the bayonet, but allegedly that the Army, the complaining Army officer thought about that for a moment. Oh, well, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And the design was accepted. Whether that's true or not is kind of immaterial, but it's an interesting story. Now, the way this works is essentially we have a clamp-on bayonet adapter here. There are 3 holes drilled across the bottom of the barrel, just semicircular cuts in the bottom of the barrel, not all the way through it. These 3 screws lock this adapter in position so it can't slide backwards, and then tightening those screws down clamps this whole assembly tightly onto the barrel. There is a sling swivel here on the back, and a matching sling swivel was mounted on the buttstock. Now, the other element here, obviously, is this perforated metal handguard. That was put on because if you do have to use this bayonet, you will presumably have just fired at least 1-2 load of ammunition, if not several. The barrel potentially could be quite hot, and you don't want to burn your hand, so you need to be able to grasp this up front for bayonet fighting. Hence, they chose to add a perforated heat shield to the top of the barrel, and it's just spot welded onto the bayonet lug adapter there, and is really quite distinctive of these trench guns. Now, there are a couple elements that are distinctive to the World War I Winchester 1897. One of them is this heat shield, which has 6 rows of perforated holes there. These would be used in World War II as well. World War II ones will only have 4 rows of holes. Early production examples have patent applied for, marked on the bayonet lug. The later ones, like this, have actual patent dates on them. On World War I versions of the 1897 trench gun, you can see that the muzzle is only about twice as wide. The exposed bit of muzzle is only about twice as wide as the bayonet handguard. World War II, the muzzle would extend a little bit further past. So that's another way you can distinguish between World War I and World War II examples. These are highly desirable guns. The bayonet lugs and heat shields are relatively simple to reproduce. Lots of reproductions have been made. However, we know the serial number range of authentic World War I examples, and that is E, as they all begin with, E 613,000 through E 705,000. So this is 689, which puts it towards the end of that range. But authentic examples will be in that serial number range. They will also be solid frame guns, like this one. Winchester also made 1897s that were takedown, where you could actually rotate the barrel and magazine assembly off to make the gun more compact for travel. World War II would see the use of takedown 1897s as trench guns, but the World War I examples, the original ones, are all solid frame guns like this. These were all issued in 12 gauge. Magazine capacity was 5 rounds in the tube, plus potentially 1 additional in the chamber. Some of the World War I 1897 trench guns are marked with a US and a flaming bomb, military property marks on the side of the receiver. This one is not, and many of them are not. There are a number of different theories about why some are and some aren't, but it is well known, well understood that not all of the actual military trench guns did get those markings. So it's not a problem from a collectability perspective if the markings are missing, as they are on this one. And of course, the one other thing that I should cover here is the fact that the 1897 is a gun capable of so-called slam fire, which is to say, if you cycle the gun, pull the trigger, hold the trigger down, and cycle the gun again, it will drop the hammer as soon as the bolt is closed and locked. So in theory, you can get a little bit higher rate of fire on these things by just holding the hammer and cycling the pump action very quickly. Now, that's spoken up quite a lot in various discussion venues. I don't think it really actually matters. The difference in speed of shooting between doing that and actually pulling the trigger is pretty negligible, and there are pretty limited situations in which you would want to actually just expend the entire pump, the entire tube, as quickly as possible in one basic direction. So People talk about it. People love the idea of a slam fire shotgun. I think because it makes them think of it more along the lines of a fully automatic shotgun, which it is definitely not. It is manually pump operated. But the Winchester 1897 is one of a relatively small number of shotguns that is capable of slam fire like that. By June of 1918, substantial numbers of 1897 guns are arriving in France. By the way, these were called, we today call them trench guns. At the time, the official designation was a riot gun. And these were supplied both with and without the bayonet lugs and heat shields. And there's really no difference in the records distinguishing between the two patterns. So it's kind of hard to recognize, to figure out exactly which versions we're getting over there, but they were primarily this pattern. Shotguns, long-barreled shotguns with birdshot were also used in the training of training for anti-aircraft gunnery. So anti-aircraft gunners and also pilots and observer gunners practiced wing shooting, essentially, in order to develop a recognition of how to give a lead, properly lead a moving target. They did that practice with long-barreled traditional sporting shotguns, including 1897s. In total, during World War I, about 30,000 of these guns would be produced for the war effort. And about 12,000 of those were long-barreled training guns. The other 18,000 were trench and riot guns. Today, we identify riot as short-barreled plain and trench as short-barreled with a handguard, with a heat shield, and a bayonet lug. Anyway, by June of 1918, a substantial number of these guys are in country in France. Mostly they are issued out to prison guards, military policemen, but they do start testing them in the field. In June, they issue 200 guns out to 4 different infantry divisions for combat testing, essentially. These are being used with double-aught buckshot, 9-pellet buckshot loads, and they're paper-hulled cartridges. And it's those paper hulls that would contribute most of the complaints that troops had about the guns. When they were being used in dry, relatively clean conditions, people really liked these things. If they were fighting in close confines, they were used for night patrols, they were used for trench raids. That's where they excelled. Where they had problems were in wet conditions. Guards who were regularly loading and unloading the shells as they went on and off of duty. The paper-hulled shells would tend to break down, deform. In wet weather, they would absorb water, they would swell, they could stick in the magazines, they were unreliable. Those were causes for complaints. And of course, by the very end of the war, the trench conflict, the trench combat kind of disappears, and it turns more into fast-moving open field fighting once again. And in that environment, a trench shotgun is basically a useless weapon. So some of the field testing reports reflect that, you know, we didn't really, you know, we're shooting at 200, 300, 400, 500 yards across open fields. The guy with the shotgun is kind of unable to contribute anything. The guys who did use them in the trenches really did quite like them. In September of 1918, the Germans did in fact file a formal protest under the laws of war that this was an inhumane weapon and threatened to execute any American soldier who was taken captive with one. The U.S. actually did seriously consider this objection, and legal counsel for the Army came to the conclusion that the German claim was complete bunkum, that the buckshot pellets from a shotgun were indistinguishable from, say, the pellets in shrapnel fragmentation artillery shells. And if artillery shells like that are fine, which everyone had decided were just fine for the entirety of the war, then there was no reason that shotguns should be an issue. The U.S. basically counter-threatened that if Germany started executing prisoners, the U.S. would too, and the U.S. had a lot more German prisoners than the Germans had American prisoners, and so the whole affair kind of fizzled out into nothing. Which one has to expect the Germans didn't really believe that the U.S. would stop using shotguns just because of a paper protest like that. But the trench shotgun would go on to serve in the U.S. military through World War II. The Winchester 1897, in fact, would see a resurgence in use during World War II, but the World War II production guns have a number of distinctive differences from these World War I guns. So that's a subject for a future video. I thought it'd be cool to start with the original, the OG trench gun, the Winchester 1897 from World War I. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.